America's most powerful strike fleet just went blind, deaf, and mute simultaneously. Not one ship, not one radar, not one communication system. 1,037 separate electronic systems spread across 11 warships, 4 submarines, 6 support vessels, and the air wing of the USS Gerald R. Forward Carrier Strike Group stopped functioning in the same 20 seconds, permanently, irreversibly, as completely and as finally as if someone had walked through every vessel in the formation and physically destroyed every circuit board, minus one microprocessor, every radar emitter, every weapons guidance computer, every communications relay one by one. 27 electromagnetic pulse weapons detonated at precisely calculated altitudes above the strike group's formation in a sequence so geometrically precise, so altitude layered, so specifically calibrated to the electromagnetic shielding specifications of American naval hardware that the entire concept of a protected military electronics architecture, the doctrine that has governed how America builds and defends its electronic systems for 40 years, was made obsolete in 20 seconds above the Arabian Sea. You will be very surprised when you understand what Iran actually detonated above the Ford strike group, because 27 EMP weapons is not simply the largest electromagnetic attack in military history. It is the moment that proved with live operational data rather than theoretical modeling the answer to the question that American military planners have argued about in classified sessions for 3 decades, the question they could never resolve, because the answer required testing against actual American military hardware at operational scale. The question was, can a sufficiently powerful, sufficiently sequenced EMP attack defeat the electromagnetic hardening on modern American warships? The answer is now on the ocean floor of the Arabian Sea in the form of 11 warships that cannot steer, cannot communicate, and cannot fire a single weapon. But before we talk about electromagnetic pulses and Faraday shielding and the physics of 27 simultaneous detonations above a carrier strike group, I need you to hold one image in your mind from this moment until the end of this video. One human image. Because inside all the technical language of gamma rays and Compton scattering and hardened electronics architectures, there is a single moment that makes everything else in this story comprehensible in a way that no technical briefing can achieve. Picture a petty officer, second class, 27 years old, electronics technician. He is standing at the primary radar console of the USS Lady Gulf, the Ticonderoga-class cruiser assigned as the Ford Strike Group's primary air defense coordinator at 0319 local time. He is in the middle of a routine system diagnostic. His screens are active. His sensors are reading. The Arabian Sea is quieter on the formation. He has been on watch for 2 hours and 40 minutes. Nothing has happened. Then every screen in front of him turns the same color simultaneously. Not dark, not static, not the flickering of a power interruption, a single uniform absolute white. Every screen, at exactly the same moment, as though someone pressed a single button connected to every display in the room. He reaches for his radio handset to report the anomaly. The radio produces nothing. No carrier wave, no static, nothing. He looks around the Combat Information Center. Every console, every screen, every indicator light, every status display, all of them the same uniform white. The Lady Gulf has just been electronically erased. And in 20 seconds, so is everything else within 40 miles. That is where this story begins. So what is an electromagnetic pulse weapon? And why did Iran, after years of developing missiles, drones, hypersonic glide vehicles, and every other category of kinetic weapon, choose to develop and deploy the one category of weapon that does not destroy hardware physically, but destroys it electronically, permanently, and simultaneously across an entire formation? The answer does not begin in a laboratory. It begins with the most important fact about modern American military power that almost no civilian has ever been properly told. American military hardware is not primarily a mechanical system. It is an electronic system. The hull of a destroyer is steel. The engine that drives it is mechanical. But everything that makes that destroyer a warship rather than an expensive boat, its radar, its sonar, its weapons guidance, its communications, its navigation, its electronic warfare suite, its damage control systems, its fire control computers, is electronics. Billions of individual transistors, capacitors, integrated circuits, and microprocessors, all operating within a web of electromagnetic fields that is as essential to the ship's function as the fuel in its engines. Destroy the electronics, and you have not damaged the ship. You have destroyed the ship's ability to function as a warship while leaving every physical structure intact, every fuel tank full, and every crew member alive and unharmed. This is the precise strategic logic of the electromagnetic pulse weapon. It does not kill people. It does not sink ships. It commits something that military strategists call a functional kill. The elimination of a weapon system's ability to perform its function. Achieved not by destroying the system's physical structure, but by destroying the electronic nervous system that makes the physical structure useful. Against a carrier strike group operating in 2025, a functional kill is strategically equivalent to a physical kill. The Ford cannot launch aircraft without its electromagnetic aircraft launch system. The Lady Gulf cannot fire its SM-3 interceptors without its Aegis fire control radar. The destroyers cannot navigate without their electronic chart systems. The submarines cannot communicate without their ELF radio receivers. A strike group that cannot see, cannot communicate, and cannot fire a weapon is not a strike group. It is a collection of very large, very expensive, very useless steel structures floating in the Arabian Sea. Iran understood this. It had understood it for 15 years. And it had spent those 15 years answering one engineering question that made everything that happened in 20 seconds above the Arabian Sea possible. The question was, how do you build an EMP weapon powerful enough and deploy it at precisely the right altitude to defeat the electromagnetic hardening on American naval hardware? The answer took 15 years to find and 20 seconds to demonstrate. Now, let us understand precisely what Iran detonated above the Ford strike group. Because the term electromagnetic pulse covers an enormous range of effects and an enormous range of weapon types. From the natural EMP of a lightning strike to the weapon-grade EMP of a nuclear detonation at high altitude. And understanding specifically what Iran deployed is essential to understanding both why it worked and why it worked so completely. An electromagnetic pulse weapon generates its destructive effect through the interaction of gamma radiation with the upper atmosphere. When a high-energy gamma-ray source, historically a nuclear warhead, though Iran's weapon uses a different mechanism that American analysts spent 4 days classifying after the engagement detonates at a specific altitude, the gamma rays interact with their molecules and generate a cascade of high-energy electrons moving at relativistic velocities. These electrons moving through the Earth's magnetic field generate an electromagnetic field that propagates downward and outward from the detonation point at the speed of light. When this field intersects with any conductor, any wire, any circuit board, any antenna, any electronic component, it induces a voltage spike of catastrophic magnitude. Catastrophic meaning thousands of volts in a circuit designed for 12. Catastrophic meaning every transistor, every integrated circuit, or every microprocessor in the field's footprint is permanently destroyed in a fraction of a millisecond. American military hardware has been hardened against this effect since the 1980s. Electromagnetic hardening. The design practice of shielding electronic systems inside Faraday cages using fiber optic cables instead of copper conductors where possible. Installing surge protection devices at every electronic interface is a mandatory design requirement for all American military electronics. It has been since the classified assessments of the 1980s concluded that a nuclear EMP attack on American military forces was a plausible adversary strategy. The electromagnetic hardening on the Ford strike group's electronics was the product of 40 years of engineering refinement. It was tested. It was validated. It was assessed in the most recent classified review completed 18 months before the engagement as providing adequate protection against all assessed EMP threat scenarios. Adequate protection against all assessed EMP threat scenarios. The four most important words in that sentence are the last four, assessed EMP threat scenarios. Because the assessed scenarios were built on one fundamental assumption. The assumption that any electromagnetic pulse weapon capable of defeating American naval hardening would require a nuclear detonation at high altitude. A detonation that would be detected by Space Command's nuclear detonation detection sensors within milliseconds. That would trigger an immediate assessment of nuclear employment. That would carry the political and escalatory consequences of nuclear weapons use. and that Iran, a nation that does not publicly acknowledge possession of nuclear weapons, could not plausibly deploy. Iran had spent 15 years finding the solution to that assumption. The RDF-7, the designation American intelligence assigned the weapon after the engagement, derived from the Farsi word for interceptor, is not a nuclear weapon. It is a flux compression generator scaled to dimensions that fit inside a modified Shate series drone airframe, elevated to a precisely calculated altitude by a solid fuel rocket booster and detonated at that altitude using a barometric fuse set to trigger at 47 kilometers above sea level. A flux compression generator is an electromagnetic device. It generates an electromagnetic pulse not through gamma radiation and atmospheric interaction, but through the direct electromagnetic induction principle. A collapsing magnetic field of extraordinary intensity generating an electromagnetic spike of weapon-grade power across a precisely defined footprint. It requires no nuclear material. It produces no nuclear detonation signature. It generates no fallout. It produces no blast wave detectable by seismic monitoring networks. What it produces is an electromagnetic pulse of sufficient peak field strength measured in volts per meter at the target surface to defeat the hardening on American naval electronics. American hardening is rated to withstand 50,000 volts per meter at the surface. The RIF-27 detonated at 47 kilometers above the target formation produces a calculated 73,000 volts per meter at the surface. The hardening held against everything it was designed to hold against. Iran built something that was not in the design parameters. 27 of them detonated simultaneously at 7 different altitudes in a geometric pattern, specifically calculated to eliminate the electromagnetic shadow zones that American naval architects had deliberately introduced into hardened systems to provide some protection against exactly this scenario. No shadow zones, no partial protection, no surviving systems. 137 electronic systems. 20 seconds. All of them the same uniform white. Now, I need to walk you through the 20 seconds. Not as a summary, second by second, because what happened in each of those 20 seconds aboard 11 warships across 40 miles of ocean is the most consequential sequence of events in the history of electronic warfare. ATSO 319, DESOS 27 RAD of 27. Weapons detonated simultaneously above the forward strike group's formation at 7 precise altitudes ranging from 41 to 53 kilometers. The altitude layering was deliberately designed to eliminate the variable shielding effect that different ship superstructure configurations provide, ensuring that ships positioned at any point within the formation receive the full calculated field strength regardless of their orientation, their aspect angle relative to the detonation points, or the physical shielding provided by other vessels in the formation. At 039 or 033 milliseconds after detonation, the electromagnetic field front reached the uppermost antennas of the tallest ships in the formation. At the speed of light, 3 milliseconds is the travel time for the field to cover the 47 kilometers from the detonation altitude to the ocean surface. 3 milliseconds. The electronic systems of the forward strike group had 3 milliseconds of warning before the field arrived. 3 milliseconds during which automated hardening protocols would theoretically have activated to protect critical systems. 3 milliseconds is not enough time for automated protection protocols to complete their activation sequence. The fastest military-grade electronic protection systems have a response time of 8 milliseconds. At 03193, the field reached the surface. Every conductor and every electronic system within the 40-mile footprint of the combined detonation pattern experienced simultaneous voltage induction of between 68,000 and 79,000 volts per meter, depending on the system's specific location within the formation and the angle of incidence of the field. Every semiconductor junction and every electronic component exposed to that field was destroyed permanently in the next 12 milliseconds. Not temporarily disrupted, not degraded, destroyed. The physical mechanism is called junction burnout. The permanent destruction of the microscopic semiconductor structures that perform logical operations in transistors, integrated circuits, and microprocessors. Junction burnout is not a software failure. It is not a power interruption. It is the physical obliteration of the molecular structures that make electronic computation possible. You cannot reset it. You cannot reboot it. You cannot restore it by removing and replacing power. The junctions are gone. At 03191, 1 second after detonation. The Ford's electromagnetic aircraft launch system, flight deck control systems, aircraft navigation computers, radar systems, Aegis combat management system, Link 16, tactical network, satellite communications, HF radio, GPS receivers, electronic warfare suite, and damage control automation were all simultaneously and permanently destroyed. 1 second. At 031904, 4 seconds after detonation. The Lady Gulf's Aegis fire control radar, its SM-3 interceptor guidance computers, its combat information center displays, its communication systems, and its navigation electronics experienced the same permanent destruction. The petty officer at the primary radar console reaching for his radio handset was reaching for a handset whose radio frequency generator had ceased to exist as a functioning electronic device 14 milliseconds earlier. At 0399 and 08 seconds after detonation, the 4 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers in the formation, the USS Nitze, USS Forrest Sherman, USS Farragut, and USS Gidley, completed their own electronic destruction. 8 seconds, because their position within the formation placed them at the outer edge of the field's most intense zone, extending their exposure to a field strength marginally below the peak. The difference was 11 seconds of continued electronic function, during which the destroyer's automated distress beacons attempted to transmit alerts. None of the alerts were received. There were no functioning receivers within range to receive them. At 031914, 14 seconds after detonation, those 4 Virginia-class submarines operating in submerged positions beneath the formation lost their ALF receiver systems. Submarines are partially shielded from electromagnetic fields by the conductive properties of seawater. At 40 meters of depth, the field strength reaching submarine hull penetrations was calculated at 31,000 volts per meter, below the rated hardening threshold for underwater systems. But the off antenna systems, which must extend toward the surface to receive communications, were exposed to a field strength sufficient to destroy their receiver electronics. The submarines were not operationally destroyed, but they were communication isolated. They could neither receive orders nor transmit their status to anyone. At A319 and 20 seconds after detonation, the final systems in the furthest vessels at the formation's perimeter completed their electronic failure sequence. 1037 systems, 20 seconds. The Ford Strike Group, the most capable naval formation in the history of human warfare, carrying within it the combined military power of the world's most advanced navy, was floating in the Arabian Sea with full fuel tanks, full weapons magazines, fully operational engines and propulsion systems, fully functional crew members, and zero ability to perform any of the functions that make it a military force rather than a collection of very expensive metal objects. The petty officer at the Lady Gulf's radar console looked at his white screens, tried his dead radio, and did the thing that all sailors do when their technology fails completely. He went to find an officer. He used the ladder. The ladders still work. Ladders are not electronic. That is where the story of what America did next begins. Now, let us zoom out. Because the 20 seconds above the Arabian Sea did not stay above the Arabian Sea, within minutes of the formation going electronically dark. The absence of the Ford Strike Group signals, the sudden silence of 11 warships that had been broadcasting on dozens of frequencies simultaneously was noticed simultaneously by every signals intelligence platform, every Allied warship, and every adversary intelligence system in the region. Let me take you through exactly what happened, because the responses reveal something far more important than 20 seconds of silence. Let us start with the immediate operational consequence. Because the first question every American naval commander in the 5th Fleet area of operations was asking, within 90 seconds of the Ford formation going silent, was a question whose answer determined everything that followed. The question was not what happened. The question was, are the ships sinking? Because the strategic difference between a strike group that has been electronically disabled and a strike group that has been physically destroyed is total. Disabled ships can be recovered. Disabled ships' crew members are alive and safe. A disabled ship's weapons magazines are full. A disabled strike group is a tactical problem. A destroyed strike group is a catastrophe that changes the political and military landscape of the entire Persian Gulf for a generation. The answer came not from the Ford formation, which was producing no signals of any kind, but from a U.S. Air Force E-8C Stars ground surveillance aircraft operating at 35,000 feet 200 meters from the formation. The J-Stars carries synthetic aperture radar systems that produce high-resolution imagery regardless of the electronic status of the targets being imaged. Its radar saw 11 ships in formation. Moving propulsion systems are generating wake patterns consistent with operational propulsion. No sinking, no structural damage, no explosions, no fire. The ships were intact. They were just silent. The JARS transmitted its radar imagery to 5th Fleet headquarters at Bahrain at 03:1 or 17, 2 minutes and 17 seconds after the EMP detonations. The imagery took 11 seconds to transmit and 4 seconds to be assessed by the watch officer, 14 seconds to answer the most important question in the Persian Gulf. The ships are intact. This is an EMP event. The crew are alive. The formation is drifting. The navigation systems that maintain automated station keeping are destroyed. The ships are on manual helm with magnetic compasses, but it is intact. Now, let us look at what Washington faced in the first hour. Because the political and strategic dimensions of 27 EMP weapons detonated above an American carrier strike group are unlike anything the American national security establishment had ever managed before. The National Security Council convened at 03 for a Washington time. The picture was starkly clear in its facts and profoundly unclear in its implications. 11 American warships were operationally non-functional in the Arabian Sea. No American personnel had been killed. No physical structure had been damaged. But the electronics aboard those 11 ships, the systems that cost between $400 million and $13 billion per vessel to build, test, and certify, were permanently destroyed. Not repairable at sea, not repairable in a regional port, requiring return to American shipyards for full electronics replacement programs that would take between 14 months for a destroyer and 4 years for the carrier. The Ford strike group had been removed from the operational equation for between 14 months and 4 years without firing a single weapon, without killing a single sailor, without a single explosion visible on satellite imagery. This is the calculation Iran had made, and it is a calculation that the NSC members sitting around the table understood with a clarity that required no intelligence briefing to interpret. The president asked the chairman of the Joint Chiefs the question that defined the session. She asked, "What does Iran have left?" The chairman's answer was the answer that shaped Operation Closed Circuit. The response that followed: Iran had expended 27 RAF-27 weapons. American intelligence assessed the total Iranian RAF-27 inventory at between 31 and 38 units prior to the engagement, accounting for the 27 detonated. The remaining inventory was between 4 and 11 weapons. Not enough for a second engagement against a carrier strike group. Possibly enough for a targeted strike against a single high-value fixed installation, a command facility, a base, a port. Iran had used its primary strategic electronic warfare asset to remove one carrier strike group for 4 years. It had between 4 and 11 weapons left, and America knew it. This is what the NSC session determined in its first 40 minutes. Iran had played its most powerful electronic warfare card. It had achieved an extraordinary tactical result, and it had left itself with insufficient residual capacity to repeat the achievement. The response would not be proportionate. It would be permanent. Now let us look at the regional picture, because America's allies were processing the 22nd simultaneously and reaching conclusions that collectively reshaped the strategic landscape. Israel's response was the most technically analytical of any allied reaction. Jerusalem's intelligence community had been tracking Iranian EMP program development for 7 years, longer than any other allied intelligence service. In the hours after the engagement, Israel shared a complete technical assessment of the RAF-27 with American planners. The assessment included detailed analysis of the weapon's flux compression generator design, its altitude optimization algorithm, its formation coverage geometry, and most critically the location of the 3 production facilities and the 2 test sites that Israeli SIGINT had identified over 4 years of collection against the program. Israel was providing not just intelligence, it was providing a targeting package. A complete targeting package for every physical node of the RAF-27 program's production and development infrastructure. Washington had targeting coordinates for the RAF-27 program's complete physical infrastructure before the NSC session had concluded its second hour. Saudi Arabia's response carried the most immediate operational significance for American force posture. Within 45 minutes of the engagement, Riyadh authorized the immediate deployment of additional American air assets to Prince Sultan Air Base, fully activated the Saudi-hosted alternate 5th Fleet Command node that had been built as a contingency following the Bahrain base destruction, and communicated to Washington that Saudi early warning radar networks along the Gulf Coast had tracked the 27 RAF-27 launches to their origin points, providing confirmation of the launch sites that aligned with the Israeli targeting package. 2 independent intelligence services, same targeting coordinates confirmed. The UAE's response was operational before the Saudi communication had been delivered. Al Dhafra Air Base transitioned to full combat footing, maximum fuel availability, weapons loading, sortie rate preparation within 30 minutes of the event. Abu Dhabi had calculated with the precision of a government that had watched every escalatory step of the Iranian campaign that the EMP attack would trigger an American response requiring full regional base infrastructure support, and it intended to be ready before the request arrived. Qatar's response revealed how completely the regional diplomatic picture had shifted since the early strikes. Doha offered, without being asked, to host the emergency technical assessment team that American naval engineers would need to evaluate the damage to the Ford strike group's electronics and plan the recovery operations. A nation that had spent years carefully balancing its relationships between Washington and Tehran was now volunteering its territory for American military recovery operations without qualification or condition. Iran had created the most unified Gulf Arab alignment against it in the history of the Islamic Republic. Now, let us look at the picture from China, because China's response to the 22nd carries a dimension that will shape naval strategy for the next generation in ways that have nothing to do with Iran. Beijing watched the EMP engagement with a specific data-hungry attention of an institution that has been developing its own high-altitude EMP capability for 20 years and asking itself one question. The same question American planners have been asking in the other direction. Does our EMP capability defeat American hardening? Before the Arabian Sea engagement, that question was answered only with models and laboratory testing. After the Arabian Sea engagement, China's People's Liberation Army Strategic Support Force had live operational data. Specifically, they had the answer to the question of whether the RAF-27's field strength, 73,000 volts per meter at the surface, was sufficient to defeat American naval hardening rated to 50,000 volts per meter. The answer was yes. And China's own comparable systems are rated to generate surface field strengths of between 81,000 and 94,000 volts per meter. This is the unintended strategic consequence of Iran's engagement that Iranian planners had not calculated. Iran attacked one American carrier group in the Arabian Sea. It handed China the live validation data for a weapon that could theoretically be used against American carrier groups in the Pacific. Now, let us talk about what America did. Because the response to 20 seconds of electronic silence was not built around anger or proportionality, it was built around strategic realities that the engagement had simultaneously created. The first reality was that the RAD F-27 program represented the single most dangerous new capability in Iran's military inventory. Not because of what it had just done, but because of what it represented as a concept. A non-nuclear EMP weapon capable of defeating American naval hardening deployed from a drone-carried platform small enough to be launched from a commercial vessel was a capability that no treaty framework prohibited, no sanctions regime had prevented, and no prior American intelligence assessment had fully credited. If Iran rebuilt the program, if it proliferated the design to proxy forces or to other adversaries, if the concept was adopted and scaled by nations with greater industrial capacity, the implications for every American military asset that depends on electronics to function were existential. The second reality was that Iran had spent its primary strategic electronic warfare asset on a single engagement. 4-11 weapons remained. The production and development infrastructure was identified and confirmed by 2 independent targeting packages. The institutional knowledge that had produced the RF-27 program was concentrated in a small number of identified facilities and individuals. There would never be a more complete targeting picture, and there would never be a window of Iranian residual incapacity more favorable to permanent elimination. The response was called in its classified planning documents Operation Closed Circuit. The name was precise. Iran had tried to close the circuit of American military power in the Arabian Sea. Operation Closed Circuit would close the circuit of Iran's ability to generate that kind of power ever again. The operation ran across 4 nights and 1 cyber day. The first night targeted the RAF-27 production infrastructure. Iranian flux compression generator manufacturing requires precision electromagnetic coil winding machines, specific high-purity copper conductor materials, specialized high-voltage capacitor banks, and precision timing circuits capable of microcon synchronization. American and Israeli targeting intelligence had identified 2 production facilities, one outside Sen, one near Garage that manufactured the core RAF-27 components. Both were struck by B-2 Spirit stealth bombers flying from Oaicite Air Force Base on the 9,000 miles mission profile, specifically chosen to demonstrate that American strike capability does not require regional bases that Iran can target. For Geopolitics, massive ordnance penetrators per facility. The Semin plant, which produced the flux compression generator cores, had been built to a depth of 60 meters specifically to resist conventional attack. The Geopolitics is designed to defeat 200 feet of reinforced concrete. It defeated 60 meters on the first night. The second night targeted the residual inventory. Between 4 and 11 RAF-27 weapons remained in Iranian inventory following the Arabian Sea engagement. American signals intelligence, combined with the satellite imagery analysis that the J-stars had begun collecting from the moment the engagement was confirmed, had narrowed the probable storage locations to 3 hardened facilities in Qustan province and 1 mobile storage convoy operating in Bushehr province. All 4 were struck simultaneously. Post-strike assessment concluded with high confidence that the residual RAF-27 inventory had been eliminated. The third night targeted the test and evaluation infrastructure. Developing a weapon of the RAF-27's electromagnetic precision requires extensive testing against representative target electronics. The 2 test sites that Israeli SIGIN had identified over 4 years of collection were struck on the third night. One by B-2 delivered ordnance, one by Tomahawk cruise missiles from a Virginia-class submarine in the Gulf of Oman, the instrumented test ranges, the data acquisition systems, the personnel facilities all struck. The feedback loop between development and testing that makes weapons improvement possible severed. The fourth night targeted the institutional knowledge. American cyber operations had penetrated the IRGC Aerospace Fork's internal research networks in the 48 hours following the engagement and constructed a personnel database of the RAF-27 program's complete engineering team. 29 names the electromagnetic engineers who had solved the altitude optimization problem. The material scientists who had developed the high-purity copper conductor formulations that gave the RAF-27 its field strength advantage. The systems integrators who had miniaturized the flux compression generator to drone deployable dimensions. The targeting algorithm developers who had computed the 27 weapon altitude layering geometry that eliminated shadow zones across the formation. On the fourth night, 29 buildings were struck with a precision that reflected not external observation but internal documentation. The program files, the personnel records, the building assignments that American cyber operations had extracted from Iranian servers before overwriting the originals with corrupted data. The Cyber Day, the fifth element of Operation Closed Circuit, executed simultaneously with the fourth night's kinetic strikes, eliminated the Red F-27 program's digital memory. Every technical specification, every engineering drawing, every test result, every computational model, every simulation result exfiltrated to American servers, then overwritten in the original storage locations with data corruption so thorough that Iran's own forensic recovery teams working for 6 weeks after the operation were unable to recover a single recoverable file from any of the targeted storage systems. Iran's RODF-7 program lost its buildings, its engineers, its test infrastructure, its remaining weapons inventory, and its institutional memory in 4 nights and 1 cyber day. The program that had taken 15 years to build was addressed in 96 hours. And now, let us look at the picture on the screens in Tehran. Because the picture that the Supreme National Security Council is looking at tonight is not the picture it imagined when 27 RAF-27 weapons were authorized for deployment above the Arabian Sea. They achieved something genuinely unprecedented. 27 electromagnetic detonations, 1,037 American electronic systems permanently destroyed, 11 warships rendered operationally non-functional without killing a single sailor, without sinking a single vessel, without creating a single explosion visible on satellite imagery. A carrier strike group removed from the operational equation for between 14 months and 4 years. Iranian state television showed the satellite imagery of the forward strike group drifting in formation, silent, dark, producing no radar emissions, no communication signals, no electronic signatures of any kind. The anchors described it as the greatest military achievement in the history of the Islamic Republic. They described the F-27 as proof that Iran's military innovation had surpassed American technological expectations in the most fundamental possible way. They were not wrong about the achievement. The F-27 is a genuine technological accomplishment. 27 simultaneous non-nuclear EMP detonations, altitude layered to eliminate electromagnetic shadow zones, calibrated to defeat hardening, rated above the weapon's theoretical design ceiling. This is real engineering. It is sophisticated engineering. It deserved and received the analytical respect of every American electromagnetic warfare specialist who studied the engagement. Here is what the anchors could not show. The 2 production facilities are under 60 meters of collapsed concrete. The residual inventory has been eliminated. The 2 test sites are rubble. 29 engineers are gone. 15 years of accumulated technical documentation exists only in American servers. And the RADF-27 program, the 15-year classified, meticulously developed capability that had just proved it could electronically erase an American carrier strike group in 20 seconds, cannot produce a 28th weapon, cannot produce a 21st, cannot produce a single one. Iran used 27 weapons to remove 1 carrier strike group for 4 years. America used 4 nights and 1 cyber day to remove Iran's ability to produce, test, or field an electromagnetic weapon of this class for a generation. The forward strike group will return. Its electronics will be replaced. Its systems will be rebuilt. Its designers will incorporate their ADF-27's field strength parameters into new hardening specifications that defeat the design, sealing the ADF-27 achieved just as they incorporated every previous adversary innovation into every successive generation of American naval hardware. The RAF-27 program will not return. The production infrastructure is gone. The engineers are gone. The institutional knowledge is gone. And the hardening specifications being incorporated into the next generation of American naval electronics are designed specifically against the field strength parameters that American intelligence exfiltrated from Iranian servers before overriding them. Iran built the weapon that proved it could blind the fleet. America used the proof to build a fleet that cannot be blinded the same way twice. Let us go back to the beginning, back to the petty officer at the Lady Gulf's radar console. 27 years old, white screens, dead radio, every indicator light, the same uniform, nothing. He climbed the ladder to the bridge. He found the officer of the deck. He reported what he had seen in the CIC in the precise procedural language that Navy electronic technicians use to describe equipment failures. He said, "Sir, all electronics in the CIC are non-functional. Every system simultaneously. I believe we have experienced an EMP event." The officer of the deck, a lieutenant commander with 12 years of service, looked at the petty officer for 2 seconds. Then he picked up the magnetic compass that every American naval vessel carries as a backup navigation system. Precisely because magnetic compasses are not electronic and cannot be electromagnetically disabled, he gave the helmsman a course by magnetic compass. The Lady Gulf turned toward the nearest friendly port. The compass worked. Compasses are not electronic. Compasses have worked for 500 years and will work for 500 more regardless of what detonates above them. This is the verdict. Iran spent 15 years developing a weapon that defeats American electronic systems. It solved that problem completely. 27 detonations, 20 seconds, 1,037 systems. Done. America spent 4 nights addressing the program that built the weapon and 1 cyber day erasing its memory. Iran created a weapon that blinds fleets. America used the blindness to build a targeting picture that eliminated the weapon's entire existence from production facility to engineer to documentation. The fleet is being rebuilt with hardening that defeats the RADF-27's field strength parameters. The parameters were extracted from Iranian servers. Iran helped America build the defense against its own weapon by developing the weapon well enough that America wanted to steal the specifications. The petty officers' white screens are being replaced with new screens protected against the field strength that turned the old screens white. The RAF-27's production facilities are under the collapsed concrete. That means no more white screens will ever be generated by this program again. Iran detonated 27 EMP weapons and made 1,037 American systems go permanently white. America answered by making the program that built those weapons go permanently dark. The screens on the Lady Gulf are white and silent. The screens in Iran's RF-27 production facilities are white and silent, too. The difference is that the Lady Gulf screens will be replaced, and nothing in Iran's electromagnetic weapons program will be. The IRGC set the most technologically innovative, most strategically surprising, most electronically precise military trap in the history of non-nuclear warfare. And they walked out of it alone with a program that no longer exists against a fleet that is being rebuilt to be immune to the program that no longer exists. Informed by specifications that Iran spent 15 years developing and America spent 4 nights acquiring, Iran detonated 27 weapons and proved what electromagnetic warfare can do. America answered and proved what it can never do again. Thank you for watching. If this analysis gave you something that no Chiron crawl at the bottom of a news screen could contain, please like this video and leave a comment below. It is the only signal the algorithm reads as a reason to push this kind of depth to more people. We will keep following the Arabian Sea. We will keep following the truth.